On this week's Monday quiz, I asked you to look at this article and to identify specific components of the argument presented here. Now, it helps if we look at the argument title or the article title to determine what this is about. So the title is Audiobooks or Reading. To Our Brains, It Doesn't Matter. So right here in the title, we're starting to get some sense of what the argument being presented here is. It's about reading using audiobooks or reading paper copies of books. So normally I expect to find a claim pretty early on in a written argument. So let's take a look at the first paragraph. If you don't have time to sit and read a physical book, is listening to the audio version considered cheating? To some hardcore nerds, it could be. But new evidence suggests that to our brains, reading and hearing a story might not be so different. Okay, so I see a couple of things going on here. So the first thing we have here is a grabber sentence. And your elementary school teachers might have taught you to start an essay this way, to ask a question and then answer it. So this person has answered it, this writer has answered it twice. The first time they answer this question saying, to some hardcore book nerds, it could be considered cheating to listen to an audiobook instead of reading a paper copy of the book. So right there is a concession, right? So that's this part, acknowledging that there is an opposing view that will say, yeah, actually it is cheating if you listen to an audiobook. And then we get the word but. But is an indicator of a shift of some sort, a change in perspective. So here we actually have a claim that says, that may not actually be true. So we're leaning towards a refutation or rebuttal here, but this is actually the first time the argument's presented. So this is the claim. New evidence suggests that to our brains, reading and hearing a story might not be so different. So here the writer launches into, in this second paragraph, launches into some background information about this study, right? How they studied people, what the people listened to. By the way, if you have never heard the Moth Radio Hour, it is definitely worth listening to. It's all different kinds of stories told by different kinds of people. So they studied people who are listening to these stories, and they mapped the results in a computer program. Looking at brain scans and analysis, the researchers saw that stories stimulated the same cognitive and emotional areas regardless of the medium, regardless of whether it was paper or an audiobook. So right here, they're describing the research that was done, okay? So the finding here is that our brains react the same way, right? Looking at this, they got the same information in the brains. Looking at the audiobooks and looking at the paper text, our brains reacted the same way. So that's specific evidence that supports the argument right here. That's specific evidence, right? So here they're giving us a little bit more background information about research that's been done in the past. So a big hint on that is they give us a year here, and we know that's a few years ago, right? In 2016, in 2016, they published their first map of a person's brain after they'd listened to stories, right? So they're showing how they initially started mapping people's brains when they were reading and what parts of the brain process different parts, okay? And then right here, again, we get that word but, which is telling us there's a shift, right? The most recent study looked at words that were from when they were listening a book and when they were reading a paper copy of the book. And it said words tend to activate the same brain regions. Okay, so that right here is kind of a refutation of that idea that reading a paper copy is different than reading using an audiobook. So a little bit of a refutation there, but also specific evidence because that's what they found, right? So the word but is an indication that there's a change here, right? So they went on to say that was surprising to the researchers, right? And they give a little bit of context here. It's part of a bigger effort to understand how our brains work with regard to language. And then we got, again, another marker right here in the article. This is really common in articles to see these sort of bold mini headlines inside an article to offset different sections of the article. So right here it says more work ahead, which kind of gives us a hint that they're moving towards the conclusion here because they're about to say, how does this research impact other areas of life, right? So right here, it says the researcher wants to do more research to take the experiment further by testing people in different languages, testing people who have auditory processing disorders or dyslexia. So auditory processing disorders, that would be difficulty making meaning out of things that you hear, right? Finding out exactly how the brain works, right? So there's more research the researcher wants to do. So that is the kind of conclusion that is an extension of the information. So it is applying it to a larger context. Okay, and then there's a quote about how she sees how it could apply to many more contexts. Okay, then right here, for now, the researcher says the results of the study could make a case for people who struggle with reading or listening to have access to stories in different formats. So right there is a really significant conclusion. That is a consequence of this research, that maybe if people have trouble accessing paper copies, we should let them read audiobooks, right? And then she gives a specific example. And then right here, the writer brings it back to us, the reader, personally. If listening to audiobooks is your preferred method of storytelling, you might not be cheating. So again, she's calling back to that question she asked at the beginning. Is it cheating if you listen to an audiobook instead of reading a paper book? And she's arguing here that no, it's not. So this whole section right here is all elements of conclusion. I hope that helps you understand how to answer the questions about parts of argument. If you have any more questions, please ask me in class or send me an email.